We're here to bring a new type of news show.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Bringing news just for you. It's Friday, November 7th here in Seoul. I'm Lee Soo-jin, and this is News Generation. Joining us today is Kyun.
Thanks for having me, and happy Friday.
Happy Friday. Also, Brooke is with us.
Hello, Soo-jin 기자님.
And both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. So it's Friday, and to wrap up the week, we're diving into something that makes Korean culture so interesting, titles. In Korea, there are countless ways to address someone, and it's rarely just their name, as Brooke just demonstrated. So what you call a person depends on their age, their job, and even how close you are. And these titles aren't just polite phrases, they're part of a deep social code that shows respect and defines relationships. The different titles form a whole system that shapes how people interact. So what about you, Kyun? What's the title that you hear the most often?
Thanks for the question, Soo-jin 기자님. A lot of people just refer to me as either Kyun 씨 or Kyun-님, especially among people that I work with. So people who I'm really, a little closer, they would refer to me as Kyun 씨. Whereas if they say Kyun-님, it's like being a bit more polite, a bit more respectful if you add 님 at the end. So in Korea, we would address Brooke as Brooke 배우님. Same with you, Soo-jin 기자님. So if you add the 님 at the end of your job title, it's showing the most respect you can. But like if I'm with people that I'm really close to, they just call me by my name, Ki-hun, or my English name that we just talked about before the show. They were quite surprised. My English name is Michael, so they just call me Michael. And also if I have like juniors, like junior models or junior, I guess, teachers, they would sometimes call me as 선배님. But it's a term that used to address someone who is more experienced or older than you in a school, workplace, or an organization. But I feel very awkward when I hear 선배님 because I immediately get this sense of, oh, I have to be more responsible. I have to take care of my 후배님들. So I just say, don't call me 선배님, just call me by my name, whatever feels more comfortable for you. So in the end, I leave it to the other person to how they address you, because it's all about how they feel addressing other people, not about how I feel being addressed.
So real quick, what would you prefer me and Brooke to call you then? Off
Brooke
the show.
to call me?
Yeah.
She can call me Michael from now on.
Okay, all right.
Hey, Michael. Or just
Michael it
Kyun,
is.
yeah.
Michael or Kyun it is.
Michael or
Okay.
Kyun.
So what about you, Brooke?
Yeah, I would say I'm really happy that we're talking about this because I always get the question, what's the hardest part about learning Korean? And I think the obvious answer is something like topic markers, you know, 은는, 이가, really difficult grammatical concepts. But I think there's a hidden trap in Korean, and it is 호칭, or the titles that we're talking about. Because if you make a different grammatical error, it's not as high stakes. When you mess up someone's title, you feel like you're being disrespectful. It's a lot scarier to make a mistake in that realm. So I really try to pay close attention to titles. I usually hear around me most often these days PD님 or 작가님, which is producer and writer. I hear that a lot in 아리랑. I'm also an actress, and when I was doing the musical Il Tenore, I would hear things like 배우님. So like Kyun just said earlier, that I would be called 부르 배우님, which means actor. I'd also hear things like 연출님, 조연출님, which is director and assistant director. But luckily for me, on the first day that I was working on that musical, they gave us a packet with everyone's pictures and their contact information, and most importantly, their titles. So I think I studied that more than I studied my lines the first week because I was so nervous. I just wanted to call everyone exactly what they wanted to be called and to show them respect. And I think respect is the most important word for today. It might be difficult, especially for foreigners, to learn these titles, but it really is, I think, one of Korea's, charming points is that it's all about respect here.
I feel like having a binder like that, handing out those binders is actually so helpful for wherever you are.
It was amazing.
So in Korea, there's a surprisingly wide range of titles people use in everyday life. Some carry warmth and respect, while others can feel uncomfortable or even awkward depending on the context. So let's take a look at the screen to see what we'll be exploring today. In Korea, knowing someone's name is often just the start. You also need to know how to address them. Whether it's based on age, job, or social standing, titles are a key part of showing respect. But sometimes they can be tricky. The lines between formality and familiarity can blur, and the wrong title can easily cause misunderstandings or even offense. So today on News Generation, we're taking a closer look at Korea's unique title system, why it matters, the debates it sparks, and how to use titles the right way. So as we just saw in the video, the way you address someone in Korea says a lot about your relationship, whether it's about respect, age, or closeness. But those same titles can sometimes be tricky, sparking confusion or even debate, especially among younger people. So Kyun, why do titles matter so much here in Korea? What are some of the main characteristics of how they're being used?
So in Korea, we have this highly developed system of family titles because age, gender, and hierarchy are also important at the same time. So there are many related terms of addressing people depending on your relationship with them. So to give our viewers a general overview of common Korean terms for addressing people, mostly among relatives, let's take a look at the screen. So starting with 아줌마 and 아저씨, these terms were originally used among family members, but it's more commonly used to address married women or adult male. And 아가씨 refers to an unmarried or young woman, whereas 이모 and 삼촌 refers to your mother's sisters or brothers, 이모 or 삼촌. And for your father's brother, older brother, for example, you'll call them 큰아빠. And for your father's younger brother, you'll call them 작은아빠. So it is a little complicated because there are titles for each members depending on the relationship with your family members. And another interesting point is that these family titles are often used even among non-family members. For example, between friends, if someone is older, you might call them 오빠, older brother, or for women, or 형, older brother for men. Likewise, when ordering food, this is a very common and a unique culture here in Korea. People often call workers who are female 이모, which means aunt, even though she actually isn't your aunt. It can seem quite complicated, but it is, again, very common way of addressing people in Korea, and especially in restaurants.
So it's interesting how family titles go beyond actual family relationships here in Korea, and it really shows how deeply age and hierarchy are woven into everyday communication here. So I'm curious, Brooke, when you first moved to Korea, what was it like seeing how people use all of these titles, and how's that compared to how people address each other in the States?
Well, that graphic definitely gave me flashbacks to Korean class and studying and trying to learn all of these titles. I remember when I first got here, I was a complete beginner at Korean, so even memorizing a word that was a few syllables was difficult. The one I heard the most back then was 선생님, which means teacher, because I was teaching English. But what was interesting is that my students would translate that directly, even though there's a cultural difference in how we use titles. So they would call me Brooke teacher, or they would say, hey teacher, I have a question. Whereas in English, we don't have that system where we use someone's job as the way that we address them. Instead, they would call me Miss Prince. So that's my last name with Miss because I'm not married. If I were married, it would be Mrs. Prince, or you can use Mr. for a man. So that is our system of addressing people. But here it's all based on your age, your relationship, your social status, like we've been talking about. For example, your friends, you might be able to call them 오빠 or 언니, depending on your closeness, or 형 or 누나, if you're a man calling your friends that. But the interesting thing about this is that if you use the word 오빠, for example, it has many different meanings, to the point where when I'm talking about my older brother in Korean, people will ask, 친오빠, which means your biological brother, because 오빠 can actually mean your older brother, your older friend who is male, or even your boyfriend. So it can get pretty complex when you use these titles. We've also mentioned 이모 and 삼촌. Even when they are not related to you, those words mean aunt and uncle, but they are used differently. So needless to say, it took me some time to get used to this system. I learned some new titles just today in talking to you guys. So I think it's something that I will continuously learn. And again, I think it's a beautiful thing for the most part, but I'm glad we're going to talk about it today because there is, sort of an underside and some different things that go along with it that should be addressed as well.
So because there's so many different titles, there's also been some debate about what the proper way to address someone really is, especially as social norms continue to change. So can you tell us more about that, Kyun?
You're definitely right. There has been many social changes. So recently there's been a debate online about manners in using titles and forms of address. So more people are expressing discomfort with terms such as 아저씨, middle-aged man, and 아줌마, middle-aged woman, and 아가씨, young lady, leading to discussions about whether it's appropriate to use these words nowadays and what suitable alternatives there might be. So in the past, people used 아줌마 and 아저씨 casually in daily life, including myself, often in a friendly way, but nowadays many find these terms quite offensive or even outdated. Similarly, the social nuance of 아가씨 has changed over time, and people have become, I guess, a bit more cautious about using it as people being addressed in these terms feel very uncomfortable. So I think we need to address this issue because, like I said, if the other person being addressed feels uncomfortable, then we need to really think about how we address them and perhaps change it into a better term that both of us feel comfortable with.
So it's fascinating how language that was once seen as polite or affectionate can now come across as outdated or even offensive depending on the situation and the connotation. It really reflects how our perceptions of respect and hierarchy are also changing. So speaking of that, there was a big debate online recently about the use of imo, which means aunt. So can you tell us more about this, Brooke?
That's right. So imo in Korean technically means your mother's sister, but it's often not used for someone who's related to you at all. It's typically very casually used with women that are in nurturing or caregiving roles, and the male equivalent would be samton. But the problem with this is that it kind of subtly reinforces these gender norms and stereotypes and expectations. And so that has led to some discomfort and controversy. For that reason, we have seen some viral posts with women online saying, you know, we actually don't really like being called emo that much. And I, as an American, I can totally understand that. Obviously, I have never had someone call me aunt that is not my niece or nephew. It's not a tradition in America. But just because it's a tradition here doesn't mean that they can't feel that same discomfort when they hear that. It might feel a little bit too close, too intimate, too familiar. So I think we should really listen to those voices and ask them what would they prefer to be called.
I think that's a good rule of thumb, just to ask them what they prefer. And I think for a long time, words like emo, which means aunt, and samchon, which means uncle, were seen as kind of familiar, but now people are starting to question whether that's always appropriate. So Kyun, why do you think some people feel uncomfortable being called certain titles like these?
So in Korea, forms of address are based not on the individual, but more on relationships, generations, age, and gender. So as a result, such a system can feel very uncomfortable or even off-putting to the MZ generation who actually value individuality and horizontal culture, not up-down, top-down. So titles like 아줌마 or 아가씨 focus on age and gender purely, which is why many people find them, I guess, unpleasant or inappropriate to use nowadays.
I think that's a really important point, especially for younger people, because it points to your age and gender. It feels even more old-fashioned, and a lot of people want to be seen as individuals, not defined by your gender, social labels, or hierarchy. Especially when it makes them feel like they're not on equal footing sometimes. And I guess that's why some people tend to react a bit strongly. And there are also titles that some say we should probably stop using altogether. So I'm curious, how much do you think the social image tied to words like 아줌마 or 아가씨 shapes how people react to them now, Brooke?
Well, yes, the social connotations of these words, it matters. And even as a foreigner, I know that 아줌마 and 아저씨 and 아가씨, they don't always have the most positive implication in Korean society. I would say the American equivalent would be ma'am. We use, like I said earlier, miss or missus, and those are perfectly fine. But when you call a woman ma'am, she could take offense because it's basically kind of jabbing at her age. We think of it as calling someone old. And to me, that's the same feeling that is associated with these Korean terms that we're talking about. Even something like imo, like we were saying earlier, it's meant in a friendly way. It's not malicious. It's a habit that people have because it's a tradition here. But it can still feel like you are being sort of patronizing and putting these women in a box based on their roles in society. So I think it's interesting seeing that Korea is moving away from that. This is a society where every interaction begins with how old are you and what's your job. But I think we're starting to see things shift a little bit, and Koreans don't want things to be so focused on these boxes and categories.
So it's funny how a word that used to sound warm or polite can start to feel uncomfortable once you think about the social image behind behind it. It really depends on the context and how people interpret it now. So some connotations can make people feel boxed into certain roles or expectations, like Brooke said, and especially this applies to women. If a title automatically links someone to domestic work or caregiving, even when that's not who they are, it can feel a bit unfair, like being reduced to a stereotype rather than an individual. So we also wanted to get a broader perspective on this. So we asked on the Arirang News YouTube channel, which Korean title would you least want to be called? So here's what the results showed. So the clear majority, as you can see here, 75% chose 아줌마 or 아저씨, the middle-aged woman or man, terms that often carry outdated or unflattering stereotypes. 9% said they would prefer not to be called imo or 삼촌, titles that mean aunt or uncle. And another 9% selected 언니 or 오빠, the older sister or older brother titles. And 7% said titles like 사장님 or 선생님, which suggest a boss or teacher relationship, were the least appealing. So I can see why, honestly, that the results came out this way, even though those words literally just mean middle-aged man or middle-aged woman. The tone or image people now get from them aren't exactly flattering, and it really shows how titles reflect more than just age. They can capture social attitudes and even stereotypes about gender and appearance. So Kyun, is there any title or way of being addressed that you personally don't like hearing?
Can I ask you guys a question? Do I look like an ajoshi?
You don't, no.
Really?
Of course not,
you.
Michael.
Now, if I ask this question to kindergarten or elementary
no
school
filter.
student, they'll be like, "Oh, you're an ajoshi." And I actually experienced this when I was actually teaching little kids. They kept asking about my age because it's a Korean society.
That's
Like,
right.
it's just embedded in our culture about getting to know people's age, because they're very curious about age because of the honorific as well. And once I told my students, oh, I'm in my early 30s, turning mid 30s, they're like, you're only 2 or 3 years younger than my dad and my mom. And I'll be like,
heart.
what does that mean to me? You're an ajoshi. I'm like, thank you, but no thanks.
Oh, God.
So it did hurt because the truth hurts. And as much as I didn't want to admit to it, I had to. But at the same time, I don't need to be told by young kids how old I am.
That's right.
I'm in my middle age. I mean, it hurts as it is being, this old. But I think I'm
You're
trying to
not
stay young,
old.
but
Come on.
because we have that kind of like social norm about age, and we're so sensitive about age. Like once men reach their 30s, they have to achieve these kind of things. So we
Right.
have those kind of standards set already from the past. I really want to break that as well and become a young 40. Young
like
40
that.
soon.
So I think that's why people ask your age. It's so common for people to ask their age. It's because of these titles. They're trying to
Yeah.
figure out what they should be
Yes,
calling
yes,
you.
yes.
So what about you? Brooke?
Well, I would say it's not quite a title, but I think many foreigners would agree with me that the word 외국인 can be a little sensitive.
fair enough.
It literally means foreigner or alien. And if you say it like a fact, that is what I am. I'm a foreigner living in Korea. That's fine. But there have been times where I've heard it kind of whispered under people's breath when I pass by. I was in a waiting room once and I heard a woman say, "Why are there so many 외국인 in here?"
no.
And she didn't realize that I could understand that in Korean, and so I just said 죄송합니다, and she was pretty surprised by that. But I hope that maybe gave her pause, so next time she would maybe not use that word in that way. For the most part, over 10 years of being here, I have been treated so kindly and so welcoming by every Korean person I've met, but I do think that we need to be careful with our words sometimes. I'm fine with 외국인 as long as it's said in a factual tone, but I don't want to be reduced to just a foreigner, just a 외국인. And I think everyone feels that way when it comes to titles. Nobody wants to be reduced to just one box. So I think that's our theme for today's show, is just make sure to remember that people are individuals and they have more to them than just their title.
And we all have names.
That's right.
Right, that's a good point. So clearly these titles aren't something you want to use carelessly. It's important to think about how the other person might feel when they hear them, because what's meant to sound polite or friendly could actually come across the wrong way. But titles and honorifics aren't actually unique to Korea. So after the break, we'll hear from a young person in Thailand to find out how people there navigate this issue, and whether similar debates exist about what's considered respectful or what's considered outdated. So that conversation will take place right after the break, so don't go anywhere.
NewsGen wants to hear from you. Go to YouTube and search out channel Arirang News. Click Posts and cast your vote in the poll. Make a new type of news with us.
Joining us today is Petra, a travel blogger from Thailand, a country also known for having a strong culture of honorifics and respectful address. So hi Petra, thank you so much for connecting with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So what kinds of titles or forms of address are used in Thailand?
We have a bunch, just like you guys, but instead of putting the honorifics after the name, ours come in front of the name instead. So we have one gender-neutral term for Mr. and Miss for all kinds of formal settings, which the word is kun. So like kun Sutin, kun Brook, kun Ki-hun, for example. And then for more familial terms, we have two for aunts and uncles older than our parents. We have two more for aunts and uncles younger than our parents. We also have one gender-neutral term for an older sibling, for someone a few years older than us. Then we have an extra one for a younger sibling as well, and it feels a little bit like Woody in Korean. But these like familial terms are used outside of the family as well. So we pretty much use those terms with anyone that we meet outside of the formal setting.
Wow, thank you for sharing that, Kun Petra. Are there ever disagreements or conflicts in Thailand over how people are addressed, as we have talked about things that happen in Korea?
Yes, absolutely. I've actually been giggling the whole way through just watching you guys. But our word for the older aunts and uncles is used as an insult as well. We actually have a word called manut pa, which is like ajuma inkan, kind of like that. Like the auntie type, which means sort of like a boomer or a Karen or something like that. So when you call someone who is not clearly older than your parents' age, those terms, it can come off a little bit offensive. But apart from that, I think the other reason is just like what Kyun Shi said. Do I really look that old? Like, do I really look old enough to be like an ajoshi or something like that? So I'd say it feels pretty similar to you guys.
Well, this is such an interesting topic. I love hearing about how different cultures address titles. So my last question for you is, how can we make sure that we are addressing someone in the right way to avoid those misunderstandings?
Sure. That's pretty similar as well. We basically start off saying something like, excuse me, Tokyo, and then we get into the topic, avoiding all pronouns until we absolutely have to address that person. And then we would start off by going like, oh, I'm actually not sure which one of us is older. I think I must be the older one. And the subtext is, because you look young. And then once we found out each other's age, then we know how to address each other. And sometimes if the other persons end up being older, we would say something like, oh, I never would have known because you look so young. So yeah, there's that.
So now I know what to study up on before I visit Thailand. So thank you. So Kun Petra, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
So we just heard from a young person in Thailand about how people there use titles. Just like in Korea, there's a strong culture of respect, but the way titles are used and how people feel about them can be a little different. So this might be a tough question, but what is the right way to address people here in Korea? And for foreigners, do you have any advice on how to get it right, Kyun?
I think it's best to avoid using titles that imply someone's age, gender, or like social hierarchy, especially when talking to a stranger or someone you've met for the first time. And referring to someone in a way that assumes their identity without really knowing them in person can easily cause discomfort and even offense. And as a foreigner traveling or living in Korea, just like Brook님, Brookie, using terms like oppa, hyung, imo to Koreans can seem, I think, somewhat cute and acceptable at the same time because they're actually trying to use Korean language. I've seen many foreigners in Korea just use English to Koreans, even asking for directions. I'm like, how do you expect Koreans to respond in English? But nowadays, many Koreans are really comfortable with English. But when I first came to Korea, and there weren't many foreigners to start off with, but then they would actually just use English and not really try to use Korean. But it's the other way around now. You see many foreigners who come to Korea just to study the Korean language, and it's great to see that they're actually trying to, really understand the culture in terms of language, and it will be great to see them use like things we use, us Koreans use, like oppa, hyung, even imo. It'll be very interesting to see Brooke go to a restaurant and say imo, imo.
I feel like you might get more extra free food if you do that.
You'll love it. You'll love it for sure.
So all this, they're really good points. Using a title that assumes someone's age or gender can definitely come across the wrong way, especially when you don't know the person well. Even if it's meant politely, guessing someone's age or gender can really backfire. So what do you think, Brooke? As a foreigner living in Korea, is there a go-to title that foreigners can use without worrying about sounding rude? Especially for foreigners maybe learning Korean for the first time, what would be the safest title that they can use?
I think Hyun made a great point. Just remember to try. That's all you can do, and you just have to hope that the people on the other side, they can feel your heart and your sincerity even if you make a mistake. I would say the safest term would maybe be 선생님, the very first title that I ever learned. I know I told you it meant teacher, but they actually use it for various different contexts. So it is a gender neutral term that you can use if you're ever in doubt. But I would definitely recommend, and I'm saying this to myself too, my advice would be ask. It's okay to ask.
Right.
I would always try to just listen for someone else to use the title so that I could maybe pick up on it. But if you really don't know, it's perfectly fine to ask someone, hey, what would you like to be called? And 100% of the time, they will just tell you. They will not be offended by it. They will actually be very, very glad that you were respectful enough to ask them what they prefer to be called. So I'm telling that to myself too. It is okay to ask what someone's title is. And again, just keep trying, especially as a foreigner. The most important thing when learning Korean is speak, get it out there, and learn the culture, learn the language, and you'll be using titles like a pro in no time, I promise.
And the thing with titles in Korea is it's confusing for whether you're foreign or not.
Yes.
So I think, Brooke, you made a good advice for anyone, just to ask what they want to be called. So titles are such a unique part of Korean culture. They reflect respect, relationships, and social values. But as you've seen, the way people use them is also changing with the times. So whether you're Korean or a foreigner learning the language, the key seems to be awareness and respect. And as society changes, so does the meaning behind the titles, showing that even language has to keep up with the times. But what's the most important thing? Just being thoughtful about how you address someone. At the same time, if you don't get called what you want, just remember most of the time it's not meant in a bad way, and a little understanding on both sides do go a long way. So that brings us to the end of today's episode of News Generation. But News Gen will be back on Monday at 10:30 a.m. Korea time with more stories and discussions. A big thanks to Kyu님.
Always a pleasure. 수진 기자님.
And also Brooke-님.
I had so much fun today. Thank you for having me.
And to our viewers, thank you so much for tuning in, and we hope you have the best day. We are News Generation.